They smiled for the cameras, they lit up the red carpet, but behind the fame was a secret too heavy to bear. This is not just about stardom. It is about the silent war waged behind closed doors, where hiding your truth could cost you everything. Today, we uncover the untold stories of LGBTQ+ icons who paid the highest price just to survive, because sometimes the most painful roles are the ones played in real life. Montgomery Clift was once called the tragic heartthrob of Hollywood. With his alluring looks and eyes that seemed to hide unspoken sorrow, Clift captivated audiences not only with his talent, but with a quiet vulnerability few could truly grasp. He symbolized a new generation of actors, authentic, emotional, and painfully real. But off-screen, Clift could not live his truth. He was a gay man in an era where coming out meant the end of a career, or worse, the end of a life. Hollywood demanded that Clift embody the ideal man. They cast him as the romantic lead, the strong soldier, the flawless hero. But behind the spotlight, he lived with a secret he could never say out loud. The tug-of-war between his inner self and the image forced upon him sent Clift spiraling into depression, isolation, and addiction. His relationships existed only in shadows, haunted by fear and guilt. The men he loved were never called by their real names. Love letters had to be written with his left hand to avoid recognition. He was never allowed to love in the way his heart longed to. The 1956 car crash marked a dark turning point. Clift survived, but the face once celebrated across the world was left disfigured. And with that face, something in his soul broke too. He continued acting, but the glowing, golden man was gone. In his final years, Clift lived quietly in a dim apartment, far from the excitement of the world that once adored him. They called him the ghost of Hollywood, a genius who was never allowed to be himself. Montgomery Clift passed away in 1966 from a heart attack. But in truth, his light had started to fade long before. Not because of the accident, not because of the pills or the alcohol, but because he could not love, could not breathe, could not exist as the man he truly was. And that was the deepest tragedy of all. Anthony Perkins, the man who played horror, but lived it silently. Anthony Perkins was the face of psychological terror in Hollywood, immortalized by his chilling role as Norman Bates in Psycho. But behind that iconic performance was a man living a much quieter, more personal horror. With his slender frame, shy smile, and tortured eyes, Perkins became an unlikely sex symbol of the 1960s. He was sensitive, intellectual, and deeply private. But the truth he kept buried ran deeper than most knew. Anthony Perkins was a gay man in a world that refused to allow it. And so, he performed not just on screen, but every day of his life. Hollywood expected him to be the charming bachelor, the mysterious heartthrob, the leading man with a string of female lovers. Studio heads orchestrated fake relationships for the press and encouraged Anthony to suppress any behavior that might raise questions. Inside, he was breaking. He feared discovery so deeply that he avoided intimate friendships and fled from any situation where he might be seen as different. Perkins underwent years of psychotherapy and even tried conversion therapy, desperately hoping he could become what the world demanded. But no matter how hard he tried, the conflict between his truth and his mask only deepened his isolation. It was not until later in life that he cautiously allowed himself to experience love. He found joy in secret relationships with men, most notably with actor Tab Hunter, though these affairs had to remain in the shadows. In a twist of tragic irony, he eventually married a woman and had 2 sons, choosing the safety of a public illusion over the risk of being rejected. And for a while, he smiled for the cameras, even as the cost of hiding hollowed him out inside. The roles kept coming, but the spark in his eyes slowly faded. He had mastered the art of performing normalcy until there was nothing left but the performance. Anthony Perkins died in 1992 from complications related to AIDS. He never came out publicly, not once. Even as the disease claimed his life, he maintained the silence that had protected and imprisoned him for decades. The man who had terrified audiences with his portrayal of inner torment had lived with his own for far too long. His tragedy was not in who he loved, but in the fact that he was never allowed to say it aloud. Sal Mineo, the rebel Hollywood forgot Sal Mineo, burst onto the silver screen like a spark in the dark. Young, magnetic, and intense. He stole every scene he was in, most famously as the troubled Plato in Rebel Without a Cause. Behind those pleading eyes and soft voice was a real-life teen who knew what it meant to be misunderstood. Off-screen, Sal was not just acting, he was revealing pieces of himself. He could not speak aloud. In a time that demanded conformity, he was a boy trying to navigate stardom, and a secret he was too afraid to name. He loved men. As his career took off, Hollywood did not know what to do with him. He was too pretty to be the rugged hero, too sensitive for the roles they wanted to box him into. And though he never officially came out, those closest to him knew the truth. Sal sought love in quiet places, in the arms of men who, like him, feared exposure. But the industry turned cold. The roles dried up, the fans moved on. Sal, once a rising star, found himself slipping into obscurity, not because of his talent, but because of who he was behind the camera. By the 1970s, Sal was fighting to rebuild his life. He explored stage acting, began directing, and started speaking more openly to friends about his sexuality. He was finally beginning to embrace the man he had always been. But just as he was reclaiming his voice, tragedy struck in 1976 at just 37 years old. Sal was stabbed in a botched robbery outside his apartment. The headlines mourned a lost talent, but few acknowledged the quiet war he had fought for years, to love without shame, to live without fear. Sal Mineo's story is not just one of stolen youth, it is the heartbreak of being discarded for not fitting the mold. He was a rebel, yes, but not the kind Hollywood celebrated. His rebellion was in trying to live authentically in a world that demanded he disappear. And in the end, it was not fame or failure that defined him. It was the courage to hold on to his truth, even in silence. Barbara Stanwyck, the Iron Lady who hid her tender truth. Barbara Stanwyck was the epitome of strength on screen, sharp-tongued, commanding, a woman who took no nonsense. In a time when most actresses were relegated to soft-spoken love interests, Stanwyck carved out a space for toughness and grit. With her piercing stare and clipped delivery, she became a symbol of female power in a male-dominated Hollywood. But behind that steel-like persona was a woman who had mastered more than acting. She had mastered the art of concealment. Barbara Stanwyck, many believe, loved women. But she would go to her grave without ever saying so. She grew up in hardship, an orphan by 4, a chorus girl by her teens. Her early life taught her survival, and Hollywood rewarded her for it. But survival came at a cost. Rumors followed her throughout her career. Her intense friendships with women, her cold marriage to actor Robert Taylor, her decision to live alone later in life. They all pointed to a different truth. But Stanwyck never confirmed, never corrected. She buried her real self beneath layers of professionalism and poise, terrified that one crack in the armor could destroy everything she had fought for. In private, it is believed she found companionship, deep, meaningful love that had no place in the public eye. Some say she shared her life with a woman, a confidant who stayed with her through decades of silence. But there were no photographs, no red carpet appearances, no declarations, only passing mentions and speculation. Stanwyck knew what the industry would do to a woman who stepped outside the lines. So she stayed inside them, brilliantly, painfully, until the end. Barbara Stanwyck passed away in 1990. She left behind a towering legacy, one of the greatest filmographies in Hollywood history. But she also left behind unanswered questions, whispered stories, and a quiet sadness that clings to her memory. The strongest women on screen sometimes had to be the most silent, off it. And in Stanwyck's silence, we hear the echo of 1,000 lives lived behind locked doors. Liberace, the king of showmanship, who could never reveal his heart. Liberace was one of the most dazzling performers of his time. A man of rhinestones, gold pianos, candelabras, and unapologetic excess. On stage, he was flamboyant, charismatic, and adored. Audiences saw him as a charming bachelor with a flair for the extravagant, a musical genius who made classical piano feel glamorous. But behind the sparkle and smiles was a man who lived in fear. Liberace was gay, and in the golden age of television, that truth was treated like a threat to everything he had built. The pressure to maintain his image was relentless. Every feathered cape and cheeky grin was part of an elaborate performance, crafted not just for entertainment, but for protection. Liberace went so far as to sue newspapers that hinted at his sexuality. In public, he denied every rumor, insisting he simply had not found the right woman. In private, his relationships were real, but hidden. He lived with lovers who had to pretend to be bodyguards or assistants. Even when scandals erupted, like the very public legal battle with ex-partner Scott Thorson, Liberace denied everything, terrified of losing the affection of his fans and the illusion of perfection. The emotional cost of the lie was enormous. Liberace surrounded himself with beauty, but lived in constant fear of being exposed. He knew that one admission could collapse the empire he had spent decades building, and so he smiled wider, dressed louder, and performed harder, all while locking away the most tender parts of himself. His legacy became one of grandeur, but also of erasure. He had love, but never openly. He had admiration, but never freedom. Liberace passed away in 1987 from complications related to AIDS. Even then, the official story was pneumonia. Only after his death was the truth quietly acknowledged. He had shaped an era, brought joy to millions, and made the piano glamorous again, but never got to live as the man he truly was. In the end, Liberace's greatest performance was not on stage. It was pretending for a lifetime that he did not need to be loved as himself. George Michael, the voice that soared, but a truth forced into the light. George Michael was a global pop icon, one of the best-selling artists of all time, with a voice that could lift a room and a look that made headlines. From Wham! To his groundbreaking solo career, George was adored for his charisma, talent, and charm. He sang about love, heartbreak, and desire. But for years, there was one kind of love he could never name. George Michael was a gay man, living in the spotlight, where every move was watched and every truth was dangerous. And when he finally came out, it was not on his terms, it was because he was forced to. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, George guarded his personal life fiercely. He spoke of soulmates in gender-neutral terms and dodged tabloid questions with clever wit. Still, the rumors followed him. Behind the curtain, George found love with men, but always quietly, always carefully. The pressure to maintain a certain image, especially in the early years of fame, was suffocating. Being openly gay in pop music was not yet accepted, and so he kept the most beautiful parts of his life hidden from the world that sang along to his lyrics. In 1998, George was arrested in a public restroom in Beverly Hills, a humiliating moment that shattered the privacy he had protected for so long. Instead of denying it, he stood tall. He came out publicly in the days that followed, embracing his identity with a mix of defiance and liberation. But the damage was already done. The media mocked him. Headlines turned cruel. What could have been a powerful coming-out story became a scandal. He did not get to walk into the light. He was dragged there. George Michael died in 2016, leaving behind not just a musical legacy, but a cautionary tale. He had the voice of a generation, but for much of his life, he had to hide the love that inspired it. He should have been celebrated for coming out on his own terms. Instead, he was cornered. And while he remained proud and unapologetic in his final years, the world had already taken something from him, his choice. And in that, the tragedy echoes louder than any chorus. Tab Hunter, Hollywood's golden boy trapped in someone else's fantasy. Tab Hunter was the all-American dream. Blonde hair, bright smile, and the kind of chiseled charm that made teenage girls swoon across the country. In the 1950s, he was the picture-perfect Hollywood heartthrob, a man who starred in surf movies, romantic comedies, and pop magazines. But the image that made him famous was never really his. Behind the sun-kissed glow was a young man hiding a truth that could destroy everything. Tab Hunter was gay and in a studio-controlled system that meant danger. The studios crafted his public life with precision. He was linked to starlets like Natalie Wood and Debbie Reynolds, not by love, but by contracts and photo ops. Gossip columns printed romances, while tabs secretly loved a man. The fear of exposure haunted every decision he made. A single slip, one wrong word, could ruin him. So he smiled for the cameras, played the part of the perfect boyfriend, and buried his truth beneath layers of charm and obedience. In interviews, he spoke of future wives. In reality, he lived in constant fear of being outed by scandal or betrayal. His most significant relationship with fellow actor Anthony Perkins was tender, but tragically quiet. They were two rising stars, both hiding, both terrified. Their love never saw the light, not on red carpets, not in public memories. Eventually, pressure from studios and personal fears pulled them apart. Tab went on to live a double life for decades. It was not until his memoir in 2005, Tab Hunter Confidential, that he finally told the world who he truly was. By then, the bright lights had faded, and he no longer needed to pretend. But the years of silence had left their mark. Tab Hunter died in 2018, finally remembered not just as a heartthrob, but as a man who survived the unbearable weight of pretending. He should have been allowed to love freely, to bring his real self to the screen, to share his life with pride. Instead, he had to become someone else's fantasy while hiding his own reality. And that, more than any headline or broken contract, was the cost of fame in a world not ready for his truth. Dirk Bogarde, the leading man who loved in silence. Dirk Bogarde was the picture of elegance, refined, intelligent, and effortlessly captivating. In the golden age of British cinema, he rose to fame playing complex, introspective men. But behind his calm, composed image was a personal truth he never dared speak. For over 40 years, Dirk shared his life with Anthony Forwood. They lived together, traveled together, built a world together. Yet in public, they were never called what they truly were: lovers. To survive as a leading man in mid-century Britain, Dirk had to become a master of illusion. He never married, never staged fake romances, and never came out. His silence was not an absence of love, but a shield against a world that was not ready. Friends knew, insiders whispered, but Dirk never gave the press a word. The risk was too high, and the cost was his voice. Their home in Provence was their sanctuary. No interviews, no cameras, just two men building a quiet life away from judgment. When Anthony fell ill, Dirk became his full-time caregiver. And when he passed, Dirk's heartbreak was immense, but still private. He mourned in silence, just as he had loved. When Dirk died in 1999, he took that truth with him. His books, films, and legacy remain. But the love that shaped his life, the love he protected so fiercely, was never given the honor of a name. In another time, Dirk Bogarde might have lived openly, freely, hand in hand with the man he loved. But in his era, even love had to hide behind a script. And for a man who spoke so powerfully on screen, the silence off screen was his greatest tragedy. William Haines, the star who chose love over Hollywood. William Haines was once one of the brightest stars in Hollywood's silent and early talkie era. Handsome, witty, and effortlessly charming, he was a top box office draw throughout the 1920s. But unlike many of his contemporaries, Haines had no intention of pretending. He lived openly with his partner, Jimmy Shields, at a time when even a whisper of homosexuality could destroy a career. And when the studio gave him an ultimatum, choose the lie or lose everything, Haines chose love. In the 1930s, MGM head Louis B. Mayer demanded that Haines enter a sham marriage to protect the studio's image. Haines refused. His decision was bold, even defiant, and it came at a heavy price. He was blacklisted from the industry, abandoned by many of his peers, and erased from the spotlight. Almost overnight, Hollywood turned its back on him, not because of talent, but because of truth. And yet, he never expressed regret for standing by the man he loved. Out of the ashes of his film career, Haines built a new life. With Jimmy by his side, he became one of the most sought-after interior designers in Hollywood, decorating homes for Joan Crawford and other major stars. His love story endured for nearly 5 decades, but even so, the price he paid for honesty was steep. He never returned to the screen, never received the recognition he once deserved. The town that once celebrated him now only whispered his name. William Haines passed away in 1973, still devoted to the partner he had chosen over fame. His story is often told as one of courage, and it is. But it is also a story of loss, because no one should have to choose between love and livelihood, between being seen and being safe. Haines was brave, but his bravery was born from a world that never should have asked for it. The world saw their beauty, their talent, their charm, but it failed to see their pain. When a society tells someone they must hide to be loved, it steals not only their truth, but their chance at peace. Let these stories be a reminder: acceptance is not optional, it is essential. If any of these stories touched your heart, share this video and subscribe to LGBTQ+ Vibes, where truth is always welcome and no one is left behind.